One of my biggest frustrations with the Arrowverse is how little its content inspired future projects and comic books specifically, in comparison with other products, especially its predecessor, Smallville. Whereas the latest Superman movie was proudly marketed around its inspirations from Smallville, I am willing to bet that not a single thing from the CW Supergirl show will be used in the upcoming Supergirl movie, to say nothing of the other Arrowverse TV shows. And honestly, who can blame them? I want to go on a case-by-case basis and show how the writers of each of the four main shows slowly abandoned the show's comic book roots in favor of more original storylines, and why that led to the erosion of the audience's goodwill. Before that, let me ask you to like and subscribe to the channel, and let's get into it. So, like I said at the beginning, the Arrowverse had a lot of goodwill from the audience, which even consisted of some prominent comic book writers. When the comics all rebooted and DC Rebirth began, a lot of the comic book runs took heavy inspiration from the Arrowverse. Yet even back then, and more so now, those inspirations are gone. There are no modern day comics that take new ideas from the Arrowverse, and it's highly unlikely that that's about to change. So let's start with The Flash, the most popular of the Arrowverse TV shows. In the beginning, The Flash was incredibly beloved, and it was in no small part thanks to its villains. The idea to have a villainous speedster ally with the Flash and his friends, only to betray them and reveal it was all a means to an end, was so good the TV show did it twice. A comic book writer must have seen the show, loved the idea so much that they created a brand new villain who followed the exact same storyline, and the readers loved it so much so that Godspeed was the single most requested character for the Flash to adapt for years, and we all know how that ended up, but hindsight's 2020. Another character who got her lore straight up ripped from the Arrowverse was Killer Frost, because beforehand she was just a side character with an honestly very underwhelming backstory and very underwhelming lore, but the Flash TV show made her a prominent character. She was a doctor and she was a close ally of the Flash, and hence the current modern day Killer Frost, her identity is Caitlin Snow. She was also a doctor. All those things obviously came from the Arrowverse. There are other examples of small things like this from the early seasons of The Flash, making it into comics, but I want to focus on Killer Frost, as I see her as the perfect example of the Arrowverse wasting a perfect opportunity to seal its legacy in comics. Killer Frost is a villain in the comics, and The Flash had a perfect opportunity to create a bitter villain feud by turning one of Barry's closest friends to one of his greatest enemies, similar to what Arrow did with Deathstroke. And I'm willing to bet that had they gone through with this and done a good job, Killer Frost would be to the Flash what Harley Quinn is to Batman the Animated Series. That is to say, she'd be a character who lives on past the show. But the Flash didn't want to commit to making Caitlin evil, so they turned her into an uninspired mess, and well, what can we do? The Arrow is another example of this. The way I see it, there are four original main characters solely created for the Arrow TV show. That is Felicity Smoke, John Diggle, Thea Quinn, and Sarah Lance. I know the women listed had their inspirations in already existing characters, and Felicity is literally Firestorm's mom, but they're also different from their comic book counterparts that it doesn't really count in my opinion. Anyway, focusing primarily on Diggle, Felicity, and Thea, here we see three different case studies of creating characters to complement existing comic book superheroes and how that can lead to those ideas being implemented in the comics. In the case of Diggle, the writers created such a rich and well-written character who didn't undermine Green Arrow lore in any way, shape or form, and he was so good that he was literally plucked from the TV show almost exactly as he was and added to the comics as a member of the Green Arrow supporting cast, and showed up as recently as the dawn of DC run. That's just perfection. When it comes to Thea Quinn, her lore of being, Malcolm Merlyn's daughter, raised by the Queens and all that, actively undermined existing Green Arrow lore, which is why there is no Thea Quinn in the comics. However, the root of her creation, the core idea, which is to give Oliver Queen a sister who can also be his sidekick and receive training, was a stroke of genius Hence, Emiko Queen was created using those ideas. And if you compare the two characters, comic book Emiko Queen to TV show Thea Queen, you can see a lot of similarities, meaning it was still a good idea. And finally, we turn to Felicity Smoke and the fact that unlike the two previously mentioned characters, Felicity was an original character whose existence actively undermined the Green Arrow mythos so badly that the only thing to my knowledge that can be even remotely tied to her that ended up making it into the comics is the fact that she's a hacker who tells the Green Arrow where to go and what to do, and that led to the introduction of Henry Fife in Green Arrow Rebirth, where he serves the same purpose. And the best part is, I remember when Green Arrow Rebirth announced that Felicity wouldn't exist, the Felicity fans were up in arms, but by then Arrow Season 4 had come out and actual comic book fans hated her for getting the Black Canary killed. Like, fair as fair. Speaking of the Black Canary, I suspect that the real reason why Sarah Lance was never added to the comics or didn't inspire any new characters is because not only does she undermine existing Black Canary lore, but far more importantly, the adaptation of the Black Canary that she interacted with the most, or interacted with at all, was just bad. Remember, it's not simply being a good character, but also complementing already existing characters. If Sarah had been a regular character on Arrow, whose presence on the show made Dinah Drake or Earth 2 Laurel the two better Black Canaries in my opinion, better adaptations of the Black Canary, I guarantee that comic book Black Canary would have a sister right now. And to be clear, sin doesn't count. Now, before I move to Supergirl, I want to talk about Prometheus, because to me, villains are much better characters to inspire comics than supporting characters. It's why I consider Godspeed to be the pinnacle of what the Arrowverse's legacy could have been. Malcolm Merlyn was, alongside Count Vertigo, Green Arrow's most prominent villains. He was already established, and Deathstroke and Ra's al Ghul are already prominent characters with rich lore that has nothing to do with the Green Arrow. And Damien Dark, he just sucked as a Green Arrow villain. But Prometheus was honestly so good that one has to wonder why he was never adapted into the comics. Now, the first answer that comes to mind is the same reason my favorite Arrowverse villain, Zoom, wasn't adapted, because they both are departures from their pre-existing comic book counterparts. And while I personally think at the very least Zoom's costume and lightning should have replaced his comic book counterparts' costume and lightning because they're just that much better, the real Prometheus is so far removed from Green Arrow. You know, he's a Batman character if I'm not wrong. Or no, actually he's a Justice League villain. Now one can argue, why not pull a Godspeed and create an original character inspired by the Arrowverse's Prometheus? And my theory is because he came too late. If he had been in the early seasons, it might have happened, but by the time Prometheus was added, Arrow Season 4 had already eliminated half of the Arrowverse's fan base, including, I'm guessing, the comic book writer half. It's really telling that in the Dawn of DC comic book run, Green Arrow had an arc with Amanda Waller of all people, clearly inspired by the Arrow TV show, as I don't think the two had ever had a meaningful interaction in any other DC thing. But in the TV show, in season 2 and season 3, both early seasons, they did have an interaction, even though it was honestly, relatively speaking, an insignificant plot thread in the TV show. But it was clearly memorable enough for a writer to be inspired. And if that happened, I have no doubt that had Prometheus been in the early seasons, we'd have a Prometheus equivalent in the comics, which is all the more pity because the Green Arrow could use as many villains as he can get. And it goes to show that the early seasons are the most important for inspiring your audience and leaving an impression. This leads us to Supergirl, which I consider to be the worst offender. As you all well know, my Arrowverse rewrite was primarily just a Supergirl rewrite because that TV show frustrates me to no end. I know for a fact that I wasn't the only one who felt that she was better written during the crossovers than in her own TV show, but that's a topic for another video. When it comes to the villains of the first 2 seasons, it is no shock that neither Astron and Non nor Rhea and the Dark Samites have been adapted into the comics. First of all, Non and the Darksamite race are already pre-existing characters, so in order to justify replacing their pre-existing lore, similar to what happened with Killer Frost, their new lore would have to be better than what's already there, which it simply wasn't. Both Rhea and Astra might have stood a chance if they were even mildly interesting. Astra was such a non-committal villain, you could never tell whether she was fully evil or fully not. And she never inspired fear despite being a fully trained Kryptonian soldier with full mastery of her powers, going up against a novice Supergirl, a season 1 Supergirl. It baffles the mind. And Rhea came in much too late into the story. For most of season 2, the villains were Lillian Luthor and Cadmus and Cyborg Superman. So it's no surprise that one of the main antagonists of the Supergirl Rebirth run is Cadmus and another is Cyborg Superman. If the TV show had done a good Cadmus storyline like Young Justice or even better Justice League Unlimited, the comics wouldn't have had to make up a better arc, since the TV show one was a bit mediocre, and it would have been part of Supergirl's legacy. It would have been something that lived on. Rain was a fantastic villain for the first half of season 3, but after the mid-season break, the writers decided to just ruin all the intimidation factor that she had gained after beating up Supergirl. Rain, to me, should have been Supergirl's Zoom or Prometheus, but instead they just undermined her for other non-comic book accurate world killers. Like, if you're gonna add more world killers, at least make them comic book accurate. And then later on, for the Argo trio of mediocrity, those witches. Lex Luthor in season 4 was literal perfection and is my personal favorite adaptation of Lex Luthor. And to be very clear, I mean just in season 4. But not only was he adapted too late, similar to Prometheus, but also Lex Luthor is one of the most well-written villains of all time, with so many adaptations, including a beloved Smallville version. So this, coupled with the fact season 5 and season 6 ruined Lex Luthor, it's no surprise that this version of Lex isn't that well talked about. I always personally felt that they were teasing Lena Luthor to becoming Supergirl's greatest enemy, and I remember how disappointed I was with what they ended up doing with her in season 5 after years of build-up. Every time any of these shows choose not to fully commit to a hero becoming a villain, it just gives us the worst of both worlds. As it stands, the Supergirl TV show's only legacy is the fact that the Danvers, specifically her parents, her adoptive parents, work for the DEO and Dreamer's existence. And the latter doesn't even count because comic book Dreamer literally has nothing to do with comic book Supergirl. I know it's not his show, but I always personally felt that Martian Manhunter's lore was underdeveloped, which is a shame because despite being a founding member of the Justice League, his lore has always been underdeveloped, and the fact that he was a prominent character in a multi-season TV show. Yes, it's not his TV show, but it had room to adapt other characters. It's just sad. It would have been the perfect opportunity to expand his lore. The fact that Young Justice did more for the Martian Manhunter mythos just by focusing on Miss Martian than DC has for Martian Manhunter in the last 10 years. It's just sad. It's such a shame. Another character who would have been ideal to carry over the comics is Alex Danvers, who was always my personal favorite side character in the TV show. I'm actually not 100% sure why nothing about her has ever been adapted to the comics, but I suspect that if the story had focused more on how her existence challenged Supergirl as a character, or maybe, here's an example, she feels unwanted earlier because, the Danvers already have a daughter, and then later on feels accepted, it would mesh well with Supergirl's already existing arc of when she gets to Earth, she doesn't feel accepted. She still misses Krypton. Like, that would justify her being in Supergirl's lore, and maybe that would have made it into the comics. And I'm pretty sure that the only arcs that Alex ever went on in the TV show was coming out of the closet in season 2 and wanting a kid in season 3, neither of which have anything to do with Supergirl or superheroes in general. I mean, technically there was that thing with Martian Manhunter in season 1, but that was dropped quickly come season 2, which doesn't even make any sense because in season 2, was when her dad was introduced. Alex would have been much better off if she was gay from the very beginning. So instead of wasting all our time with useless storylines that nobody cares about, that screen time was better served developing season 2's Kadma storyline with her father and intertwining it with Alex and Kara, who both share the same father who's in Cadmus. Like, that should have been more developed. Like, the fact that her coming out of the closet took multiple episodes. My god, we're here for superheroes. Anyway, I don't even see a point in dedicating that much time to Legends of Tomorrow. By the time I dropped the show, Heatwave was the only actual comic book character left on the team, I think. Maybe there was another one, I don't remember. And I get that the show thrived off being its own thing, but that defeats the purpose of being tied to DC Comics instead of being a CW original. All in all, I find it to be so annoying that in a few years the Arrowverse will be forgotten. Hell, even now it's already fading from memory. If the writers had focused more on the superhero elements of these TV shows and less on original character drama, then maybe it wouldn't have ended like this. Don't forget to subscribe to catch my future videos, and until then, hail and farewell.